Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. Welcome to another wonderful winter week as we dive into the news and analysis of what's going on in our fair, sunny South Africa. Today, I'm, of course, your host, Nicholas Lorimer, as I usually am, and I'm joined by Hermann Pretorius, who is usually in Pretoria. Hermann, how are you?
I am in Pretoria.
And Sara Gon, who is usually in Joburg. Sara, how are you?
I am still in Joburg, yeah.
Excellent.
I mean, we just knock it out of the park with these introductions, just grabbing the audience immediately.
It may surprise you to know that I really literally don't think about them. I just say the first thing that comes into my head, which is why they never make much sense. Anyway.
It's like EFF policy, don't worry.
Yeah, no, it's the same. No, there's method to that madness. Don't let's not undersell that. So, of course, everyone knows about the Zuma drama that's going on. It's in all of the media and stuff. And so we're not really going to talk about it today because so far it's all sort of in limbo. We don't really know what's going to happen. And so we're going to wait for something big to happen. And it's looking like it's going to be the kind of thing that ends up on international news with helicopters flying overhead and smoke billowing out of a compound or something somewhere. Anyway, we'll follow up with that as it happens. But in the meantime, let's talk about something related to the whole Zuma affair.
Just on that note, will someone just check the location of Navy Team 66 or something? I can't remember who it was in Abbottabad, but if you're going to make it about, a smoky compound, a helicopter, I'm just thinking, my goodness, I didn't know Zuma was in Pakistan and Obama in the White House, but, here we go.
Well, with all of Zuma's...
Only if only.
With all of Zuma's friends outside his house in Nkandla, one wonders what the end result of this is all going to be. But anyway, let's get onto the news today. And this is, of course, related to the whole Zuma thing. And that is Interpol has issued a red notice for the Gupta brothers and their wives and some of their associates. So what is a red notice from Interpol? Well, I had to look it up. But it is what you'd expect it to be, which is basically an order saying that all countries that cooperate with Interpol should work together to arrest and extradite these people whenever possible. And so basically it's an arrest warrant issued by Interpol to all the police agencies of the world to say, if you find these guys, please arrest them and send them to South Africa. South African authorities got this issued, and they're very excited. They believe that they will be able to bring the Gupta brothers back. At the moment, an associate of the Guptas, Iqbal Sharma, and his co-accused have been transferred to the Free State High Court in Bloemfontein for trial, and that matter was going to be heard in September. So this is specifically relating to 25 million rand fraud and money laundering case, which is linked to a dairy farm project. That's officially what they're being charged with. But Hermann, let me go to you. So I think that there, at least for a while, I'm not sure if it still exists, but there was for a while this kind of belief that if the Guptas just get arrested and sentenced, maybe during their trial it comes out who else is involved, and the scourge of corruption will finally be lifted from South Africa. Just we can catch them and put them away, and maybe one or two other politicians on the side, and then it'll all be good. And South Africa will return to where it was in 2008, which is a place that had a higher GDP per capita and in many ways better services than it does now. Hermann, your thoughts on that idea?
I think that idea is still very much out there, and I think it's in the interest of both of the governing parties' factions to want to keep that out there, because that, as long as you can say the real problem is that the Guptas have not been brought to justice, then you can essentially do whatever, and a lot of the South African media will give you a free ride in many of these cases, because what goes unsaid is the fact that the Guptas were never the cause of South Africa's problems. They were a symptom of the cause, and the cause is bad policy that is still in place. Policy that makes it possible for the government to take huge sums of money and channel it according to the wishes of the government, outcompeting other entities.
Can I make an analogy? It's like prosecuting someone for buying a stolen car. Yes, you shouldn't buy stolen cars, but the car shouldn't have been for sale by that person in the first place.
Exactly, and prosecuting that person won't bring the car back. Prosecuting the Guptas, while it's important in terms of the rule of law, and the rule of law is one of those pillars of liberalism and constitutionalism and democracy that really deserves more from the people of South Africa and the government of South Africa, but that goes without saying. It's not going to fix the policy problems that led to the situation in the first place. It is like bad singing technique. Now, let me, of course, the go-to reference is singing technique. Is having studied opera, if you have a bad singing technique and you develop vocal nodules, and you remove the nodules, but you don't adapt your technique, you don't fix the underlying problem, you're going to develop the same nodules. And we haven't had the Guptas in this country for 2-3 years? Has corruption suddenly gone away within their absence? Will putting them behind bars bring back the billions that were stolen in terms of COVID relief? It's buying into a convenient narrative where the problem was policy. The problem is still policy. If you're in a country where the government is the biggest spender, you're in a country where the politicians will be the biggest looters. It really is as simple as that. And perhaps one thing to note about these red notices, it's good and well. I think it's fair, procedural or process to instigate by the South African, prosecutorial authorities, and Interpol can do its best. But in 2017, there was a chemical attack on Julian Sergei Skripal in Salisbury in the UK. A red notice for their arrest was issued in 2017 for a chemical act of war, a chemical assassination of a foreign national by Russia, and that red notice has led to nothing. So while the red notice is important and it's a good step, while the rule of law is important, we shouldn't think that the red notice will lead to a reassertion or a reassertion of the rule of law, nor should we believe that a reassertion of the rule of law will address what fundamentally went wrong in creating this toxic environment where the Guptas were able to be the recipients of billions and billions of undue gains at the cost of the country. Those problems, the underlying cause, still exists.
That's exactly right. I really like your point about how, when it comes to socialism, that is massive government control over society and the economy, corruption. A lot of well-meaning socialists go out there and they say, if we could get rid of the corruption, our socialist governments would thrive. Well, the problem is it's a feature, not a bug of socialism. When you hand enormous amounts of power to people and you disconnect them from the accountability systems that exist in free markets and properly functioning democracies, corruption is sure to follow. It's impossible to get away from it. It's just a contradiction in terms to have a corruption-free socialist society. And you can pretty much look anywhere in the world, even countries that are very well run, places like Sweden, that used to have these very extensive social services nets. They don't really as much anymore. They had significant amounts of fraud in the claiming of those benefits and that kind of thing. So in places like that, there's corruption.
And to add to that, if there isn't corruption, there's inefficiency. Because you've got this nonsense where Gauteng, it cost the Gauteng government 16 million rand to allocate 13 million rand in support to artists during the COVID process. I mean, yes, let's say there's corruption there, but even if you just think about the bureaucracy of having to administer these sorts of nonsense by taking people's money, paying someone else to give it back to them in some different form. If there isn't corruption, there's inefficiency. So the underlying problem is still there.
Yeah, imagine you had a pipe where half of the water you sent through it just got sucked out. It's kind of like our money, the way our government works. Sarah, your thoughts on this whole issue, your thoughts on the Guptas and their role in South Africa. Is Hermann right in to say that they're not really that important to the bigger story?
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. Often you hear apologists sort of say that it's not just the person who pays over the money that is at fault. It is the person who receives it or asks for it and gets it. Of course, But the problem is that the control lies with the person giving the money, and no one has more control than the political classes. And so, I mean, I still, when I listen to Gupta, when I listen to Zuma sort of repeatedly saying he hasn't done anything wrong, I want to personally go out and strangle him, because it's so vilely wrong. And the other thing the government made a mistake with, successful governments, as you correctly say, do suffer from corruption, but successful governments are those who manage to ensure that their corruption does not overtake whatever amount they use to make the society successful. And the ANC kind of it couldn't define its own. It couldn't define its own bounds. But I mean, I think what's, in a way, I would take more pleasure in seeing the associates, the guys slightly below the Guptas, getting it. The guys who acted with impunity, acted as the middlemen, the guys who were before the courts. Now, those are the sort of guys that I think could send a real message. The Guptas are almost a sort of fantasy-like figures. I'm not even sure if they matter that much. But to see someone like a Salim Essa get charged with stuff and be found guilty and end up in a jail, that at least would be satisfying. Whether it would be of any use, I don't know. But I think what's become apparent is that, in a way, the corruption is second in this country to the failure of the government for the reasons of BE, cadre deployment, inefficiency, incompetence, just not having the skills. It's the fact that the society has got very, very little left. And that, I think, it almost is like, in a way, the corruption is just money, but the inefficiency removes everything else.
I think that's exactly right. All right, let us move on to our next topic for today. And that is, we covered this a little bit last week, which is that there's trouble going on in eSwatini, formerly known as Swaziland. And the big cell phone provider in that country, and you see them if you've ever been to Swaziland, you'll see adverts for it all over the place, is MTN, which is, of course, a South African company. They are being taken to court by a group of eSwatini lawyers who are demanding that they reinstate internet in the country. So, in accordance with a request from the eSwatini government, like many autocratic regimes, MTN shut down the internet in the country to prevent protesters and things being able to organize and discuss online and that kind of thing. This is commonly used across the world. It's been used in Myanmar since the military coup. It was used in Iran since the big protests there, last year? Internet blackouts are very useful for authoritarian governments to crack down on dissent. But the lawyers have taken MTN to court, saying that this violates MTN's own due diligence framework, which it says that informs all of its decision-making about whether to shut down the internet. So MTN says that its due diligence framework is drawn from UN guiding principles for business and human rights framework to protect, respect, and remedy. They say that the framework, supported by a toolkit, outlines the steps that all MTN operations would follow before, during, and after the occurrence of a digital human rights incident. Incidents would come in the form of a request or instance where an authority or non-government entity approaches MTN on a matter relating to freedom of expression, data privacy, and information security. This framework includes assessing potential incidents and potential impacts of the incidents that may affect customers' rights and enabling our teams to respond to incidents through a clearly defined process, which includes identifying remedies for the affected customers. So there's a lot of corporate jargon in there, but basically they're saying they're committing to respect human rights to some degree in other countries. Now, of course, this framework doesn't really seem to be up to much, saying that in responding to this court summons, the MTN has said that all of their actions in eSwatini have been in compliance with their due diligence framework. So one is left to question what is really the point of it. Sarah, your thoughts on this issue?
Well, I assume the due diligence framework doesn't contain a clause in the contract with individual subscribers that says we will provide a service to you unless the Swazi government writes us a letter and says you must withdraw this service. Look, I mean, cell companies haven't exactly been models of righteous defenders of human rights. I assume there are probably a whole lot of reasons why the governments in Swaziland would be no different, could storm the corridors and haul their guys away, and that would all be very horrible. But I would imagine that the individual subscribers do make up a large percentage, if not most, of their income, as opposed to as opposed to the king and his family, but that is a fairly extensive grouping.
Can I also just say that the Swazi government is not the same as the military junta running Myanmar or the Iranian Revolutionary Republic. This is not a super powerful state with massive financial resources.
Which either suggests that the MTN management is very cowardly, or there's some sort of agreement. No, I don't know what the situation is, but on the basis that you've got this sort of framework and the fact that the organization is South African, you should err on the side of human rights. And it's not for you to decide whether your internet service or email service, whatever it might be, your WhatsApp group, is going to stir the flames of insurrection. The flames of insurrection have been stirred in Swaziland many times. This time does seem looks like it's got a little bit of legs, because it's not easily quieting down, and one gets a sense that the authorities are only cracking down, are certainly cracking down, but not in the sort of absolute sense that they have done in the past. So there may be a shift in the way things operate. It may mean, therefore, that if things do change in eSwatini, MTN will lose its license. Look, it's in a difficult position, but I still like to think that the human rights of your subscribers have to come first.
Especially when it's such a small market, relatively speaking, I think. So, Hermann, your thoughts on this? I think this is part of a phenomenon of big corporates in particular preaching how they are in accordance with all of whatever the politically correct view is at the time, that they're in favor of human rights, that they're in favor of social justice, that they're in favor of puppies and kittens and all those good things. And the moment they get into any sort of an opportunity to have to make a courageous decision, they make the cowardly decision. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I must say, let's single out MTN for a moment. I mean, this was the company that until last year was intimately, involved in MTN Iran Cell, the cellular network in Iran. So, I mean, this isn't a company that clearly has any traction for for human rights, these things. So I must say that I have a dim view of corporate South Africa in general, but I have a spectacularly dim view of MTN, with a track record in Africa and the Middle East for just siding with the worst possible actors for whatever reason. I have no idea why MTN is such just a hotbed of moral vacuity, but somehow they became that. And this doesn't surprise me in the least, that MTN would do this. So, just shame on you, MTN. I mean, you really ought to just, take a long, hard look into what you might have once called a soul.
I think the reason that MTN has this is in this situation is because of all the South African cell phone companies. It has a bigger footprint globally than anyone else. So it's gone into areas where the rest of us fear to tread.
Yeah, no, and so firstly, I think MTN is just showing their true colors here, as usual. But then the problem really also comes down to this, just a few questions actually. Number one is their defense genuinely we were just following orders? Because that went well historically. Another point is the fact that surely you must have the wherewithal to understand that your commercial subscribers will not forgive you for this. I mean, Sara, as you correctly point out, is it stated in the contract there that you can suspend pay us money, but on the whim of the government, we can suspend our service. I think that's contractually bizarre. And then the third thing is, I think this is a broader warning shot. We have seen this happen in Namibia. We've seen this happen in Swaziland or eSwatini. We've seen this happen in Zimbabwe. The greatest mistake anyone can ever make is thinking, surely not here, surely not here. The corporates in South Africa have never found a government they did not like or they did not enjoy the little cocktail weenies of. And I don't mean that in a any other than a cocktail sense. But the point is also that we are in a period of time where it's government allowing these corporate giants to be the corporate giants because they are making it difficult for competitors to enter the market. By keeping that market a sweet, sweet little deal, a sweet deal, tremendous deal for these corporates, they have this lovey-dovey little relationship where the cozying up cannot be more erotic or toxic. And I speak from, perhaps some personal experience into my love life. But the problem here is that when you look at this sort of nonsense, realize that it is fundamentally more dangerous than anything that we have ever faced. Because in the past, freedom of speech and expression was something that once a pamphlet left the Gutenberg press, no matter what the Catholic Church wanted to do with it, Luther could distribute them. Now we're no longer in that situation. We now have these tech giants that are not terribly fearful of. I don't think you have to, look under your bed for a tech giant every night. But we have to understand the levels of powers these people have in regulating our equivalent of free speech. It's toxic and people should be aware of it. And more than anything, consumers should be aware of this. And consumers should take it on themselves to say, I will support businesses that will support me.
Yeah, no, that's very well said. I also am amused by some of these incidents sometimes from one perspective, which is that, I've spent my whole life being told by sort of hippie-ish people with massive clouds of marijuana smoke around them that the corporations are behind everything, man. The corporations are the big thing to watch out for. And the reality is corporations are more like the sort of lackey of the state. It's not really the other way around in the way they tell it. Anyway, that's just a common narrative that you find out there that I think is a bit garbage.
With regard to the sort of social justice element that you raised earlier, I mean, look at the situation 4 French companies have found themselves in with regard to human rights abuses and operating in China.
Yeah, exactly.
You can kowtow, pardon the Chinese. You can either kowtow or you can just very quietly try and make sure the West doesn't find out about what you're doing. But you're not, by and large, corporates are going to, they will either, the only way not about China is to leave China. So
yeah. No, we've seen
sorry,
this.
I really want to quickly say something on your point. And the sad thing is, if classical liberals in favor of a free market don't really read this thing right, we're going to be on the losing end of what comes next, because it's going to be the corporations, it's going to be the capitalists, it's going to be the capitalists, the billionaire class that did this. Yes, my impressions are very 2016.
Your Sanders impression is better than it's better than your Trump one.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very proud of it. But I mean, it's a party trick. But the problem is the party is the Democratic one, and they don't like Bernie Sanders. So the thing is that if we free market capitalists don't play this right, we're going to get blamed for this nonsense. We should now be making the argument that it's because markets are not free that these behemoths can emerge and just become these toxic little whores for governments across the world.
Very well said, sir.
Outside of the bed.
Yes. All right. Let us move on to our final story today while we still have time. And that is a story that is emblematic of the larger problem that we've been experiencing since the beginning of the pandemic. So the DA in KZN, their spokesperson for arts and culture, Bradley Singh, has attacked the KZN Arts and Culture Department for allegedly spending 2.2 million rand on personal protective equipment for the staff of a library. Now, you may think to yourself, well, that sounds all right. I mean, okay, yeah, it's a bit expensive, but government is always doing that, and there's been so much PPE money spent on everything else. Like, what's the big deal here? Well, the library hasn't been built yet, and so presumably doesn't really have staff. so, this is I guess really what I'm getting at here is we've seen this throughout the whole pandemic, the massive looting of state coffers that not only has been going on since the beginning of the pandemic, but continues to go on in terms of money that's allegedly being spent on personal protective equipment and then disappears. I've heard an anecdotal story that I have not been able to confirm, so take it with a pinch of salt, that the members of the Metro Police in Joburg were supposed to get free masks with branding and stuff to during the pandemic while they did their work, and yet all of them had to buy it from the city themselves because apparently the money somehow didn't get allocated correctly. So yeah, it's been a complete cluster bomb, so to speak. Sarah, your thoughts on this issue?
This is what I mean by not knowing when to balance your corruption with your provision of services. It's that, and the fact that we've had the lockdown since 16 months, and we've had the Zondo Commission for 2 years before that. So the Zondo Commission has been there, exploding little bombs left, right, and centre of corruption, and yet, in the height of literally a global health crisis, our government at every level carries on being corrupt to extraordinary extent. I mean, we're talking, I don't know what the current figure stands at, but it's tens of billions of rands, at least, if not hundreds of billions of rand. I have to admire it. It's so. I don't know whether it's cunning or stupidity or, knowing that they've got very little chance of being caught, or they'll take the risk of being caught because it's worth it. But
why not all of the above?
All of the above. I feel like as a citizen in the country, I'm being molested in every sense of the word. It's almost beyond comprehension. I mean, you can be sure that the one thing that was never going to exist is that library.
Yeah, no, exactly. Hermann, your thoughts, very briefly.
Yeah, no, I think if the library were ever to be built, heaven hopes it wasn't near a university, because then it wouldn't have lasted that long. But I think something that is perhaps worth pointing out is I've got a piece here, March 2020. Ramaphosa promises to be ruthless on profiteering during COVID-19 crisis. In this speech, he had some strong words, like really very strong words, that there will be no corruption. Oh, and then there's this other thing from the other day. 6 months ago, actually, Ramaphosa says there will be no corruption in procurement, distribution of vaccines. I mean, does anyone take this man seriously anymore? Because it's just been, it's just astounding. It's just astounding that we can be in this situation where something as obviously corrupt as this can happen, and then we can be in a country where large segments of the media just, flirt with this man with the idea that he has credibility or moral leadership or any substance whatsoever.
No, that's exactly right. Anyway, we must call it to a close there. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you want to support the Institute of Race Relations, which of course funds the Daily Friend and all of our good stuff, you can SMS your name to 32823. We'll call you back to sign you up as a friend of the Institute, which means giving us a small monthly donation, 100 Rand, somewhere around there, can be less, can be more, per month. And it goes a long way to making sure that we can stay independent, do our thing, and keep producing policy, analysis, all that good stuff, free from the chains of corporate South Africa, which is the alternative. Anyway, thank you very much. We hope you enjoyed. like us, share us, subscribe to us, all that good stuff. And we'll see you tomorrow on the Daily Print Show. Cheers, everyone.